brands and retailers are really struggling to manage external supply chain, really struggling to get product onto the shelf. There's a whole network of third-party manufacturers, co-mans, co-packers that a lot of people don't know exist or have any real insight into. And we started Keychain to help brands and retailers better work with those manufacturers to get product to market faster.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Chain Reaction Podcast, where we take a closer look at the companies and the ideas that are shaping modern supply chains. Before we dive in, please consider subscribing. That helps our conversations to reach a wider community of supply chain professionals. Thank you. Well, today I'm joined by Oisin Hanrahan, a serial entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Keychain, an AI-powered platform which enables CPG companies to rapidly design, validate, and source new products. Oisin, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Michael. Thanks so much for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Before we get into the mechanics of the CPG and FMCG supply chains, I'd like to start on a bit of a personal note. I had a quick look at your LinkedIn profile, and it seems like entrepreneurship has been kind of a main and a constant theme throughout your career and throughout your business experience. So, yet you've still chosen to pursue some formal elements, formal education, economics, and finance, well, namely LSE and all the way up to MBA at Harvard. So what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to talk about that. Look, my background is I'm from Ireland, from Dublin. A long time ago, as you pointed out, I studied economics right in college in Trinity in Dublin. And then from there, I started a real estate business in Budapest in Hungary. Ran that for a little while, and then I worked in a couple of other small tech startups in Dublin, and eventually I moved to London and decided to go back and study at LSE. And look, I think there is a real role for formal education in the entrepreneur's journey. I think a lot of the time, people talk about it as, hey, you either go to college or you become an entrepreneur, or you go to college and, obviously there's the Thiel Fellowship, which encourages you to drive. There's this vision or picture painted that the two don't coalesce or they don't support each other. Whereas I think in reality, these two things live very harmoniously together. And I think there's a lot of room to both learn in college and also build a network. So you pointed out I went to HBS. When I was at business school, I met my co-founder Omong, and we actually didn't finish our MBA. So after the first year, we dropped out of Harvard, and we started building what was at the time was called Handy Book. It grew into Handy and ultimately became the largest on-demand home service company in the United States. And I think that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't, started it together. And, I wouldn't have met him if I hadn't gone to business school. And, we ultimately ended up hiring many of our classmates, and we built the network around what we had at business school. So whether it's the formal education or it's the network you build or the friendships that get formed or the serendipity or the space that education creates, there's something to be said for, the hustle and the grind and, starting a company directly inside an organization. When you see the problem, there's also something to be said for the space that education creates, where it creates space to think about ideas, and it creates space to start a company. So
I don't completely understand where you're coming from. Is kind of in my experience, what I saw is a challenge to find the right balance between getting an education for an ability to train yourself into a kind of comprehensive, diverse but structured thinking, versus sometimes education gets mined into a very kind of boxed set of what is the art of possible, and then it imposes some sort of limitations. So kind of entrepreneurs are not a most typical career out of MBAs. I mean, I'm sure that you know this. Investment banking and consulting are the by far the most popular. So, but that brings us kind of back to the kind of entrepreneurial environment and Keychain in particular. So you are now building Keychain. So you've been doing that for a couple of years. The business raised 7.5 million recently from a group that is also backed by Tesco. And you guys recently launched in the UK. So what exactly is Keychain? What specific supply chain challenges does it aim to solve for brands or vendors or retailers?
Yeah, for sure. So after Handy, we sold Handy in 2018 to a company called Angie's List, and unusually as a founder, I actually took on running the parent company that I sold to. So I actually took on running Angie, and I built Angie, and Angie is the largest home service company in the world, with 7,000 people, a billion plus of revenue. And when I ran that company all the way to the end of 2022, I was the CEO. My co-founder was chief revenue officer. And after that, we both quit at the end of 22, took a little break, and we started to think about what we wanted to build next. And I think second-time founders typically go through this journey where they think about starting a studio, and maybe they're gonna, be a chairman or president of a couple of different companies, and they're not gonna actually end up running any of them. But we kind of tested into that path. We had 3 or 4 different ideas, and one of them, this was back in the middle of 23, was Keychain. And we started Keychain with this idea that the supply chain's really messy. Brands and retailers are really struggling to manage external supply chain, really struggling to get product onto the shelf. There's a whole network of third-party manufacturers, co-mans, co-packers that a lot of people don't know exist or have any real insight into. And we started Keychain to help brands and retailers better work with those manufacturers to get product to market faster. And that's like a really big, crazy big, large vision. It involves everything from manufacturing operating systems to source of truth on who can make what to, food safety. And we zeroed in pretty quickly on one very small problem to start with, which is figuring out who can make what. So the first product that Keychain launched was an AI-enabled search and discovery platform that lets brands and retailers search for any one of over 3 million consumer products, and we tell you where that product can be made. And that's, a very simple, small problem when you describe it, but actually, if you think about it, it's at a pretty high level of complexity. And today, that product has over 20,000 brands and retailers that use it. They post about $1.5 billion a month. We've raised, as you said, most recently we raised about £7.5 million. Altogether, we've raised over $78 million from both financial technology investors and also industry partners. So companies like Hershey, General Mills, Riches, Schreiber Foods, and then most recently, we added W23, which is backed by Tesco and Ahold and ShopRite and Woolworths and Empire. So it really is, the very beginning of this journey to help brands and retailers get better product made faster.
Is there a focus on a particular category? For example, it's like foods and confectionaries or beverages, or it's across everything, all the way from T-shirts and cosmetics down to, toys and Christmas goodies?
Yeah. So we started with food and beverage, and we started in the United States with F&B, and we trained our own technology so that we could build a taxonomy that had never been built before that describes what goes into making product. So you think about, say a large retailer wants to make a Kind bar. They notice that Kind bars are selling really well. say, let's make a Kind Bar equivalent, or let's make a private label Kind Bar or something like it in a different flavor. Um, that's not a granola bar. So what we've done is we've fine-tuned our AI models to analyze that product at a very granular level. So instead of saying a Kind Bar, we would say something that's slabbed, rolled, baked, guillotine cut, bottom and rope, drizzled, flow wrapped, inner cardboard, outer corrugated, sometimes gluten-free. And if you can do those 10 or 11 things, you can make a Kind Bar. So what we did was we picked certain categories and we trained manually so that we could look at every category and identify what the taxonomy is, what are the processes that go into making the product. So we started with food and beverage. We've subsequently moved into new categories. So today we cover food, beverage, beauty, household, personal care, pet, and there's some more categories to go. We also expanded both geographically, as you pointed out. We recently expanded into the UK. We're in the process of expanding across Europe. So hopefully by early next year, we'll cover most of Europe. And we also reverse engineered into the back of the supply chain as well. So we started with just manufacturers, but then we also went to ingredient providers and packaging providers so that it pulls the whole supply chain together so that whatever you're looking to get made, we can help you go from not just an idea, but the very beginning of the process to the product actually getting made.
Fascinating, and that definitely gives quite a lot of kind of flexibility and freedom to the brands and manufacturers to drive design and even test pilot kind of manufacturing of some of those products. But from the size point of view, what is your target audience? Would those be kind of the big names that you mentioned, the likes of the Tesco's and the Walmarts or Hershey's, or would there be an SMEs like, I don't know, you and I, we may decide to start on a chocolate bars business, and then we'll just but we have no idea. We think that we know what the niche is, and we decided, we're going to manufacture X, Y, and Z flavor, and with the help of your platform, we can find a manufacturing base for such products.
Yeah. So we built the product for enterprise. So at our last the last business we ran at Handy, we partnered with some of the biggest retailers in the country to deliver their home services. So Handy would install all the TVs that were sold at a Walmart. We partnered with Target and Costco and lots of other retailers to do their home service installations. So when we were starting Keychain, we actually started with those relationships. We started with the enterprise level relationships that we had, and we said, let's build an enterprise grade tool. So if you think about those big organizations, they've got thousands of private label products. So you think about a Walmart or a Target or a Costco, they've got thousands and thousands of private label products that they need to figure out which ones are working. They need to be constantly launching new private label products. It's a very complicated supply chain, and it really does lend itself to an enterprise level tool. So that's where we started building Keychain for. However, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of movement at the moment toward emerging brands building incredible products. Whether these are the emerging brands that are catering to specific dietary needs, or they're catering to taste changes, they're catering to evolving consumer desires, and we kind of got those companies almost for free, in that by building the deepest product in the world for who can make what, and by targeting it at enterprise, we kind of got the thousands and thousands of startup brands for free. So today, 8 of the top 10 retailers in the United States use Keychain. 8 of the top 10 consumer brands use Keychain. But also we have a long list of thousands and thousands of startup brands who we didn't build the product for. We built the product for enterprise, but those startup brands also show up and use the product, exactly as you pointed out, to both create their product, but also to find manufacturers.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by FLOX, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit FLOX.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
The reason I asked the question, I had a podcast actually recently with a supply chain, European supply chain director from, I think it was THX, cosmetics. So they're contract manufacturer for cosmetics and beauty products. And we talked about exactly this kind of scenario where, I don't know, a couple girls may record an absolutely viral TikTok videos selling their products, which may just shoot up in volume, let's say in Brazil, and they have no capacity to deliver anything physically in Brazil, but require the depth of manufacturing capability to make, scale up, deliver, and provide the services. So it's a gig economy, and there's some of that. You never know which startup all of a sudden is going to massively increase the volume. But I appreciate where you're coming from. Is yes, if you build a system that is enterprise grade reliability, that in a startup environment, it's fairly easy to fulfill. So can we talk a little bit about what has been called Aldi effect, effectively? Because you mentioned private labels, and Europe is very heavy on that, particularly in Germany. There's a growth of private labels. There are growth of private label brands across multiple categories. And is that where you believe the kind of the direction of travel of the retail and consumer goods sort of segment?
Look, I have a take on why big CPG was originally successful. Like, you think about the Unilevers and the General Mills and the Procter and Gambles, and the Hershey's and the Nestle's of the world, and you think about like what drove their success, and they've had many decades of success. And I think there's three primary things that drove the success of those big brands. The first is they figured out and had the scale to do mass media buys. They could spend 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 million doing mass cable network TV buys across either the country or the continent, depending on whether you're focused US, UK, Europe. The second is they figured out distribution, and they had a pretty iron grip on distribution through large retail. So they had a certain amount of shelf space at a Walmart or a Target or a Costco, and they were dialed in on making sure that they managed those retail relationships really, really well. And the third is they figured out how to produce goods, food and beverage in particular, at massive scale, and that gave them really, really strong economies of scale. That carried them for a really long time. Today, those three things are no longer an advantage. So massive media, it's actually not how most people are consuming news anymore. They're consuming it on social. So the idea that you can create a homogenous message for 300 plus million Americans, or 60, 70, 80, 100, 200, 300 million Europeans, 500 million Europeans, depending on how you draw the boundary of the continent, is no longer true. People are consuming on social, and it's actually easier to get your first 50,000 customers by creating a really tailored message on Instagram that targets a particular set of people than it is to get your 10 millionth customer. So the idea of mass media as the way to go to market is actually, it's imploded. The second is economies of scale from production. First of all, people don't want to all buy exactly the same product anymore. They actually want to cater to their own dietary needs, whether those are paleo or nut-free or gluten-free, or whatever the order of the day is in terms of the direction they're taking their preference. So like the idea that you have one product for everybody is not the case anymore. Past that, the emergence of external supply chains, so these 20,000 manufacturers in the US and 30,000 manufacturers across Europe who can do third-party manufacturing really affordably and cheaply has meant that they don't have that advantage of having the means of production to drive down costs. And then lastly, we all understand how some of the best brands are bypassing retail altogether and going direct to consumer, or they're selling through some of the marketplace platforms, whether it's Amazon or others. So like the means of locking up the shelf space is no longer something that plays into the hands of big CPG. So you think about all the things that led to big CPG winning for the last 5 decades. You look forward and you say, the next decade probably isn't the decade of big CPG. It's probably not one where you make the same product for 100 million people, you sell it quite affordably, you market it to them through, massive media buys, and you just hope that they buy it. Instead, it's going to be the decade of emerging brands or private label, where the proliferation of private label product has really exploded. It's not the case that, all private label is now value. You think about Tesco by itself, they've got a value product, they got a mid-tier product, you've got Tesco Finest, which is, arguably some of the best product on the shelf. And then you look at the number of SKUs, the number of products they have within that, it's exploded. They're not just doing, one Tesco Finest olive oil. You've got a Tesco Finest olive oil. You've got a Finest organic olive oil. You've got an infused olive oil. You've got a bio-organic or, you've got an organic, you think about all the different directions you go with this. And now you say, okay, well, the next decade is going to be emerging brands and private label, or if the big CPG guys can get out of their own way and innovate much faster, we're going to have a fight on our hands. But it's really the decade of innovation. It's the decade of increased product velocity, more tailored product, greater rates of innovation, more product obsolescence, more choice for the consumer in a potentially really positive way. And that's, the big tailwind that Keychain is here to ride.
And I'm 100% with you, and I completely understand kind of where you're coming from and the benefits. But I would also suppose that it depends kind of on a category by category. Yes, I totally see how innovation can really drive, food categories. For example, we all try to drive, test new things. And as you said, different olive oils, you can have, Cumbrian and Tuscan olives or olive oils and all of that. But on the other hand, there are some categories that could be a bit more conservative. And I'm speaking from personal experience. For example, I know my missus, she prefers only one brand of detergent, and she tried many in the past, but now we stuck with it for the past 20 years, and we don't want to change it because we know consistency, quality, the result, and you know that you can do what you can do with it and how it needs to be worked with. So that my question would be slightly different. So how do you think that some of the big CPGs would not see that as either threat to their business model, or they will try to fight back somehow, the likes of P&G, the likes of Unilever?
Look, I think there's no question that there are certain categories where change is more reluctant and, there is more hesitancy to do anything. However, I think the consumer is better educated today than they have ever been in the past. And more than that, their perception of their own education is probably higher than it's ever been. So, you take detergent. Is there a set of people who are never going to change their detergent? For sure. But is that percentage growing or shrinking? Are there more people today who are scrolling on Instagram or TikTok who are seeing, you know what? I don't want microplastics in my detergent. I actually don't want any abrasive salts in my detergent. I don't want any, I don't want my detergent to come even in a plastic bag. I actually want it to come in a more sustainable packaging. So the percentage of people who are not just looking, saying, hey, does it meet my price need? And does it meet my need in terms of, efficacy and sensitivity and whatever else? And my cleaning, that percentage is shrinking, not growing, because more and more people are educated on dimensions that are not just price and quality as traditionally defined, because they are taking into account, again, whether it's health, whether it's environment, whether it's ethical concerns, like there's just so many more dimensions going into the purchase decision. And people are living before, you could address people by effectively buying ads on Channel 4 or, whatever you were going to buy your TV ads on, whatever major station. And you could say, look, we're going to pump out this ad that's going to address people's concerns. And we're going to do, a good, better, best comparison. And we're going to position our product here. Today, I can guarantee you there are 1 million plus people in the United States who are making a detergent decision not based on what they see on TV, but what they're consuming on social. That's informing them that their concerns on, they've tapped into something on microplastics, and they've become laser focused on saying, I'm going to remove microplastics in every format from my life. I think those are really bad. I've zeroed in on it. Like, that's what I'm going to do. Those people are going to look at detergents not through the lens of, did it clean my clothes and was it, on sale for £2.50 today? They're going to look at it through the lens of microplastics, detergents. Is this good or bad for me? And I'm looking at my influencer or authority on microplastics to lead me down the path and tell me whether my detergent is causing microplastics to come out of my clothes, whether it's causing microplastics from the detergent to make its way into my body. And that's the lens they're looking at the world through. And the percentage of people like you or your wife who are making a decision based on, I've done this thing for a really long time, I tried a bunch of other stuff, now I'm going to keep doing it until, someday I pass away. The percentage of people thinking like that is shrinking, not growing.
Oh no, I completely with you on the whole. So there's space and there is time and a place for thinking like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. On the other hand, we actually in some other areas we need to try new things and we need to innovate. I'm looking at my kids, and that's exactly the way that's their behavior and that's their attitude and that's how they're thinking about the world and choosing their products. Which is kind of, I'm thinking from a business and manufacturing point of view. If I take that thinking to its almost like natural conclusion, then if I'm a manufacturer, I'm almost getting disincentivized to build my own manufacturing base. I'd rather become an IP and a marketing business. And I'm owning brands, I'm owning products, I'm owning designs, I'm owning my customer relationships, and I outsource the production to somebody else because I might decide I'm going to produce something else later on with a different provider. So I'm becoming Apple in a sense that doesn't own their production capacity.
I think, if you look at the direction of travel, you're absolutely right. Fewer and fewer of the products on our shelves are made by people who own their own manufacturing. That is absolutely correct. Like a greater and greater percentage, said differently, a greater and greater percentage of the product that sits on our shelves at a grocery store today is made by third-party manufacturers. And the brands that you see on the shelf are focused on innovation, product positioning. They're focused on design of the product. They're focused on figuring out the ingredients. They're focused on figuring out what the recipe is. They're focused on all the other things that go into making the product. They're not focused on, quite so much as they once were, on picking the machines. They're not focused on managing the labor and making sure the labor shows up on time and puts the boxes on the pallet, or, buys the robot that puts the boxes on the pallet. And that's a bifurcation. And that's happened across the board. Like you think about, industry in general, the world, it goes through consolidation, vertical integration, and then, fragmentation all over again. So we're currently in the phase of specialization where some people are building brands and making product and figuring out, and some people are actually physically manufacturing the product. And, you think about private label, which is 40% plus of the grocery market in the UK. That's a growing share of market. Like, and those folks, they're like the amount of private label where the retailer owns their own means of production, it's tiny. Like that's an infinitesimally small amount of the market. So almost 100%, call it 98, 90, 95 plus % of private label made by third-party manufacturers, and the role of the retailer is to identify the product need, identify the formulation, and figure out like what to pull together and design the product, and then someone else goes and makes it. And I think that specialization in what we all do in the industry, that's like a, you know, we see it across almost every industry. People specialize and then they vertically integrate and then they respecialize and fragment all over again. It's how the bankers of the world, the Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanleys of the world, stay in business by, you know, helping these businesses split up and then recombine and charging fees at every juncture.
No, yeah, I know what you mean. And I totally agree with you with the sentiment and where you're coming from. And but that brings us back to kind of Keychain, and the Keychain being essentially a toolkit with which the manufacturers and retailers can expand their innovation, their manufacturing base, and the manufacturing activities. But you mentioned AI earlier, and it's a very kind of fashionable word. But can you talk a little bit about the tech that is behind the Keychain? What makes it that exceptionally successful and effective at helping customers, bringing the cost down, designing better product, speeding up the time to market, and anything in between?
Look, every part of going from an idea to the product on the shelf is complicated and takes time. So every single part, from when we say, hey, we want to make a sparkling water, a flavored sparkling water in a can, to it's on the shelf, takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. We have put AI at the center of every single one of the human processes. So everything from figuring out what processes go into making the product. We have the deepest database in the world. We've trained more technology than anybody else to identify what processes go into making product. We've built the deepest database in the world of who can make what. We've applied massive amounts of AI to build that database. Then you go to the actual assessment selection process of figuring out who can make what and figuring out who's right for you. So at any point in time, you know, you have a planned product roadmap with, you know, dozens of products you want to make on it. You've got a backlog of products that are already in market. You've got multivariate analysis you need to do to figure out which producer you should be going with. We apply AI to figure out for you, based on the hundreds of manufacturers that are in market, which ones you should think about using. We use AI to analyze their recent recalls, any lawsuits they've been involved in, how effective they are in terms of their food safety requirements, and your future roadmap. So again, you think about like how you would traditionally do this. You do it using, I don't know, some sort of scoring analysis, or you know, you would do this using a 2x2 matrix. But actually, this is multivariate analysis that requires game theory to figure out, okay, well, if I add that manufacturer, then they won't be able to do these other three products in my roadmap. But then if I change that product from being in a 250 ml can to a 500 ml can, then it actually is possible to move it to this other manufacturer, which then unlocks the ability to do 7 other products. But then if I do this other manufacturer, it gives me the ability to also have coverage on 2 products where I only have one manufacturer in my supply chain today. So it gives you the ability at every point in the journey to apply AI to really complicated decisions so that you can better recommend actions and understand the consequences of the decisions you're making.
So what it tells me is that it's actually not just about the AI and the tech capability of the system to manage to run analytical algorithms. It's also about the quality of the data and the underlying information that goes into the either training or into a database that the analytical algorithms are analyzing. Because if you don't have the right data set, there is no AI can invent you the name of a business who can effectively produce for you a chocolate bar.
Exactly as you said, it is AI in the initial collection analysis of the data, it's AI in the recommendations, and it's AI in the workflow itself. So that ultimately what we want to do is help people make better product. So that's what Keychain's all about. It's about helping brands and retailers and manufacturers make better product faster. And that's where we apply AI.
No, perfect. Well, we've touched upon many industry challenges, and I know we've barely scratched the surface. But we're already coming on to kind of 33 minutes. And I think, as I like to ask every guest on a podcast, if you had a magic wand and you can wave it and eliminate just one particular problem that holds back the supply chains today, what would it be?
Look, I think there is so much potential good in the supply chain that we have, but I think we've put in so many layers of complexity. Anything we can do to reduce the number of layers between somebody picking a product off the shelf at the very end and all the steps that go into it all the way back to the very beginning, anything we can do to reduce the amount of complexity in the supply chain will reduce costs for the consumer and reduce waste. So the more we can take layers out of the supply chain to reduce complexity, the better it is for everybody. So I think that's my one theme. It is something we've talked a lot about before. It's how do we take away layers of complexity, layers of abstraction, middlemen that sit in the supply chain, and more directly connect consumers, retailers, and manufacturers without the layers and layers in the middle.
Yeah, totally agreeing with you, and I completely see where you're coming from. That's exactly one of the ethos that goes into what we're trying to build, but for logistics. So, Oisin, thank you very much for joining me on such an insightful conversation. I'm sure that many listeners, especially the ones who've stayed with us up until now, well, thanks very much for listening, and I'm sure that they've enjoyed our conversation very much as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Great questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.